Today on Phone Calls with Friends, my guest is Aaron Mitchell, head coach of the St. Thomas More Collegiate Knights. Aaron led his Knights to the 3A Provincial Basketball Championship in 2014, in addition to winning it as a player with the Terry Fox Ravens in 1994. But his experiences don't stop at high school basketball. Aaron has a number of post-secondary experiences as both an athlete and a student, and is always able to give a unique perspective on any situation. Let's see what Aaron has to say. All right, good morning. Phone Calls with Friends, episode 4. It's Aaron Mitchell. Thank you very much for joining us. And a little bit of background here. You came in and helped us out with the 75th anniversary video. And when you were leaving, I don't know if you remember or not, but we actually ended up talking for about 40 minutes and going on a number of different topics. So when this concept came up, you were actually one of the first person I thought that would be a great guest, simply because based on that conversation. So even though this is episode 4, you were sort of part of the framework in building it. So I really appreciate you joining me this morning.
Oh, my pleasure. And I actually was hoping you'd bring that up because it just made me realize how passionate you are about all this stuff. Like it's clearly not just a job for you. You love it, right? And we probably could have sat there and talked for a few hours, but we all have jobs that we had to get to.
Exactly. It was mid-basketball tournament too, which we're going to probably touch on a little bit today, which is there's not a lot of downtime. So as much as I'd love to sit around and talk basketball all day, it wasn't the best time for it, but that's why you're back today, so we can actually get rolling. And it's one of the things, actually probably a great place to start, one of the things that we were talking about and pertain very well to the 75th anniversary is that one of the reasons these tournaments have been so successful is that the people have stayed involved with them. Like you go all the way back, like looking at the 75th anniversary, obviously Ken Winslade was a big part of it, but we had Ed Suderman come through from MEI, who's dates way back, George Bergen, who was more in the 70s, people like yourself who played through the 90s and are still involved today. But the huge part of the success of it is the fact that people that started with it stay involved with it, and that's why the tradition and history has stayed so strong over the years. 75 of them, to be exact.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was young, the guys in high school, those guys were my heroes. Like, they were who I wanted to be. I would go to the Agrodome every year and never really thought about it as a young person that I was going to get into coaching. But kind of as I started to get towards the end of my university degree and realizing I wanted to teach and be involved with the youth, it just seemed like a natural fit. And then kind of part of me just realized, hey, you know what? A lot of people put their neck on the line and gave back to the game that meant so much to me. So I felt kind of, it's important to give back and carry that tradition on. And it's not necessarily something that's a conscious thing. I think it just, obviously, I love to compete as well. Can no longer compete on the basketball court because I'm way out of shape. But so you get that competitive spirit out, and then just the ability to give back and kind of mold and shape young people's lives. It's cool. Yeah,
I think you kind of touched on it there. Is it's when you say it's not necessarily a conscious decision. I think if it's in you, and it's just something that's going to naturally progress over time. And so, right. Let's hop back. Let's go to '94, and you're playing for Terry Fox.
Yeah.
Some interesting stats when I was kind of doing some research on that. You guys were 40-2 that season. One of your losses came a month before the end of the whole thing. You played Richmond in the final that year, and you guys had a 31-point loss to Richmond a month prior to that. Like, there must be some sort of story behind that. You can't go 40-2 and get blown out in one of those games. Was Richmond just that strong, or do you remember the game? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I remember a few things about it. I think everybody kind of had Richmond on a pedestal that year, but it was also, I think if you asked them, they knew that we'd be solid. And we beat them in the final of our tournament, the Legal Beagle, which used to be before Christmas. They used to host it before. And I think that kind of woke them up a little bit. And we had this exhibition game scheduled with them. Our only other loss was to an American team. And we went in there, and the Colts, for those that know the old Richmond High days, the gym was packed. They had Boston, foreplay a long time playing. The crowd was going nuts, and we were never in it. They just demolished us. And one of the things I remember, I got stuck back on a 2-on-1 with Bobby Singh and Andrew Mavis, and Bobby had the ball, and so as the defender, I'm trying to figure out what do I do here. So I kind of hedge at him, and as I'm hedging at him, he throws it, and I'm like, that doesn't look like a shot attempt. Well, he throws it off the backboard to Maeve, who 1 foot, 2 hands it, and basically his entire waist crotch area was in my face, and the crowd just goes bananas. And I don't remember the end, but I'm pretty sure Richie and Don probably mailed it in pretty quick, and got the subs in and let us lick our wounds. But it was definitely an eye opener for us, knowing that if we were going to make a run for the title to repeat, that would be the team that we'd probably have to top, right?
So sometimes that's pretty important too, to get that eye opener early. Like you wouldn't, when you're 40-2, it's probably pretty easy to get complacent over time and expect wins. So every once in a while, a wake up call isn't the worst thing in the world.
Oh, for sure. I remember, our 2012 year coaching when we lost in the AA final to Mission. We kind of, in a different way, we beat Mission at the GW Graham tournament in the final, and I think that kind of woke them up. So we kind of went from, we were kind of in the 12-15 area to just being in the top of the rankings and kind of just being noticed for the rest of the year, and they were ready for us, and they beat us in the final. So it can happen both ways, but absolutely, sometimes a good beatdown will get you even more prepared.
So heading into the final in '94, which again was Richmond, of course, was like you must have had a bit of a chip on your shoulder too, something to come back for, because it was actually a really good game. Like we talked the other night briefly, you actually scored the points that took the lead for you, and then you guys never looked back. But up until that point, like it was really going back and forth, point for point, and then you guys managed to close it out in the end. What do you kind of remember about that night?
Yeah, I mean, I remember getting a ride from Mike Hine down to Fox for the walkthrough in the morning. And then I remember we were loose. We hopped in our buddy Cody Jones. His dad, Mike Jones, was the wrestling coach at SFU for decades. A bunch of us piled in his car. We went to Coquitlam Center and we played like video games, and we just had a good feel, right? We were confident, but we knew we had to play well. But we believed in ourselves. I mean, when you have guys like Dave Morgan and Vic Gregor as your leaders, they had that championship experience. We were pretty confident. We remember being down early. I was doing a little bit of reading too, because it is a long time ago. Yeah. By the hairline and the beard. I remember being down in the first quarter and us having to chip away, and we went to a 1-3-1, which is not necessarily our style, but we kind of had it in our back pocket all year, and we hadn't really shown it because, as you know, we went 40-2, and we were 40-1 or 40-2 going 39-2 going into that game, and didn't have to throw it at anyone. And then we threw it on in the second half, and I think it really put them on their heels. We took Bobby Singh out of the game. He was a lethal standstill shooter, huge guy, right? But I think that kind of floored them a bit. And then, you asked me about that layup. I remember it being a big moment, but I don't remember it being as big as it was in terms of making the free throw as well, and then taking the lead from there. And then I think we just had them on their heels and just kind of led from there, with Vic Gregor having an unreal game and being our point guard. So for me as a kid, that's all I dreamed of. So I remember just bawling my eyes out, because I just had visions of being in that moment from when I was like 10 years old, and to actually be there, was quite special. So it was cool, and it was a great game. And I think that year as well, a lot of people looked at the semifinal against Carey High and thought that, some people say that was still one of the best games they've ever seen in the tournament, which was very back and forth. So when you go through that and you're able to pull through that, there's no way you're not confident going into that final game.
Yeah, and did it live up to, you mentioned that you said, going to the Agrodome and everything was something you dreamed of always playing, and did it live up to you, the atmosphere, the feeling when you walked out there? The Agrodome, so sorry to take a step back here. One of the things that I've really noticed working through the 75th anniversary project and everything, one of the things that really hasn't changed is the students and the atmosphere that shows up, when the kids come up and get painted. But the Agrodome really did seem to be something special. Like it seemed, I look back at all the old footage and it seemed like it was just super crazy in there. Like, did you pay attention to that walking out? Did it fade during the game? Did you feed off it? Is it, do you block that out once you're playing, or how did that all go? Did the atmosphere live up to it for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was always a guy as a player. I always fed off the crowds. I loved when, I would hear someone chirp or have something to say. Probably sometimes drove my coaches, a little crazy, maybe if I would say something back. But I do remember in the semifinal, I had a steal and got an and one and kind of like did this thing to our crowd. And I remember the coaching staff not being too happy about that, talk about focus on the game, pay attention, don't let the crowd affect you. And, but how could you not feel the energy and emotion? You're doing the layup lines, and 4 feet away are 300 kids from your school packed behind the hoop with the kazoos and drums and whatever, and it's standing room only in there, and just the environment was so cool. These dungy little locker rooms, and you come down the staircase and you can hear the noise, and then you feel a little bit of the cold from the ice underneath, and then you step out there on the floor and you can hear the wood underneath your feet, and just the memories. And then just when that final buzzer goes and everybody rushes the floor and it's just absolute mayhem, those are the moments you live for as a kid, and to be able to experience that was phenomenal.
It's so obviously, as much as athletics are important to you, you went on to, it seems like education was equally as important to you. Like looking back through kind of your history, you went on to Langara, played a couple of years there, won a national championship in the CCAA, which is awesome. We hosted the national championships two years ago, and that's, I didn't know a lot about the CCAA coming into that, but that's unbelievable basketball. Like it was extremely high level, high skill basketball. I believe you even won some fairly significant personal awards throughout that experience. So you just did 2 years with Langara?
Actually played 3 there.
3, yeah.
I played my first year at Cap under Phil Langley. I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go. Was getting recruited not too heavily in Canada, but Calgary was definitely an option. But I was just, it's funny you talk about school. If you ask my parents right now, they would probably say it's a different story. But I think that's just part of the maturation process, right? I was a basketball player first, and then a student, and then with time, I just kind of grew into realizing, hey, this is going to come to an end, and I've got to get my, poop in a pile, so to speak. So I went to Cap, played there in my first year, and then transferred to Langara after playing on the U19 team. They used to have the U19 provincial team for Kevin Hansen. Yeah, and then had to sit out because I was ineligible the first semester, and we actually we hosted the Nationals that year as well. They were up at SFU. And we got upset. We ended up finishing 4th. We were like top 2 in the country. Had Lewis Johnson, who's a Richmond High grad, former MVP. And then 97, 98 had Randy Knorr and James Maximew, and just a great group of guys. And a couple All-Canadians, but those individual awards don't really happen unless you have great guys and a great locker room and great coaching and all those things. So I was in Victoria on the weekend and went out with Ian Hidlay, and we were talking, and he said, you've got to be in a rare category in terms of, winning the provincials as a player and then as a coach, and then also a national championship. And then we ended up ironically losing the CIS national final to St. FX when I was in Brandon, to Randy Knorr and their team. So, guys that were my teammates and guys that I played against my whole entire life. And then we ended up facing each other in the national final. But so many great memories and great moments, and so many great coaches that mentored me, and then when I hit Brandon, I knew I was there for 1 year, and I knew I just needed to get school done. My body was starting to break down a bit. My knee was pretty rough, and I just, kind of playing pro or even experiencing that wasn't on my radar. I wanted to get my education degree and move on. And so I'm really glad I did and made that choice at that point, because I've enjoyed every second of my teaching career, and 16 years into it already, and it doesn't feel like a job yet.
Well, and fortunately, you've been able to bring your passion of basketball back into it, and involve that with a team that's not only been keeps you around basketball, but it's also been successful. So you still get that the competition and the success feeling coming out of that as well. So it's kind of a win-win for you. But
sure.
On that, let's hop to 2014. That was a huge year for Langley Event Center. We went from hosting 3 provincial basketball tournaments all the way up to 8. It seemed like a big hill to climb for us, but it was turned out to be an awesome event. And obviously, you guys were a huge part of it, with the 3A being considered the new tier. You guys marched through, and it was I remember pretty clearly a lot of details from that event on you. And your first game was a bit of a blowout. Who did you guys play? Samuel Roberts Tech in the first game?
Yeah.
And that was and you kind of walked through it. But then the second game, you guys played Sutherland, and it was a team that we don't you don't really think too much about when you think about basketball. They haven't been around the tournament too much, but I think you ended up winning the game by 5 or 6 points, but it was actually a lot closer than that. I remember they ended up fouling about 4 or 5 times in the end. I think Terrell Jana went to the line maybe 3 times himself and was putting him away. And so the final score was something like 71-64 or something, but it was a lot tighter than that. So you must have been feeling it while you were coaching that game, that the pressure was already on.
This is why we love you, man. Your memory is like, holy smokes. I don't know if you're that good with your family remembering important dates, but your memory for the sporting events is phenomenal. Yeah.
My wife would argue on that, but
yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Good old Brad Thornhill, good buddy of mine, great coach, been around for a lot of years. And remember, I should remember his name. They had a great left-handed guard. He was like a 2-3, ended up playing at Cap for a couple years. So they were not a bad team. And he went box and one on us against Reese Morris, who ended up being the MVP of the tournament that year. And so that kind of took us out of our rhythm a little bit. But like you mentioned, we hit our free throws down the stretch. And the hard part as a coach, the thing that gives you these bags and makes you lose this hairline are just when you're sitting there in those moments when they're out of your control, and all you can do is hope that you've put your kids in a situation where they're confident to be successful and aren't worried about failing at that moment, because it's not really a failure even if they miss the shot. But yeah, Terrell was a special player, and you could just see that he was going to move on to special things as a grade 10 to be able to step up and make those shots. And then I'm sure we'll talk about the semifinal the next day and not making the free throws as a team.
That's good. Sorry, finish.
Just the quarterfinal. I mean, it was good to experience a tight game at that point and be able to pull that out. But yeah, as a coach, sometimes it's just out of your hands, and the guys got to make the shots.
Well, the semifinal, I think, was the game of the tournament. It might have been one of the best games of all 4 tiers that year. That was incredible. And talking about Terrell Jana, I always think it's it kind of crossed my mind the other day that we had Terrell Jana and Chase Claypool playing each other in that game, who've kind of gone on, and not to go too deep into this, but I know that as of this year, Notre Dame's probably going to consider themselves ACC, so it's kind of that rivalry's kind of kept going for the two of them. But it was there's a lot of talent on the floor coming into that game, and that was just an unbelievable basketball game. It was about as tight as it can possibly get. And like you say, I don't we can go through the whole game, but really for the last 2 minutes, the drama really started kicking in. And I don't know if you're going to want to talk about this at all or not, or even if you remember it, but there was a play, I think it might have been to Reese Morris, but Terrell Jana threw a pass into the key, and it was pretty clearly a travel on Reese Morris before he made the basket, which put you guys up 3. And it was really a big turning point, because after that, Abby started hitting 3-pointers from all over the floor. And you guys went, I believe, 1 for 8 on free throws down the stretch.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you guys, because that's one game I don't have on file, so I'd love to dig that up, because it was such a blur. And I think in those moments, that's where your kids are looking, especially at the high school level, they're looking at you for confidence, right? So if I'm acting chaotic and getting emotionally involved in the moment, then they're probably going to feed off me. But yeah, we had a funny group. Nothing really rattled them that whole year. They just were, not even me. I tell the story the week before provincials, I threw them all out of practice one day because one guy showed up with one shoe, and I just was so fed up. I tossed them out of practice, all of them. And so they were just able to get it together at the right moment. And yeah, you're telling your guys, hey, we've got this lead, don't foul a shooter. And all of a sudden Abbotsford, who, I think everybody thought was the top team that year and clearly had earned that right. But we just played our best game of the year that night, and that's all we needed to do. And in the tournament, as you've seen over and over, anything can happen. And we put it together, and they just decided to make it real fun and interesting down the stretch. The crazy thing was that I remember all those missed free throws, but we got the O board every time. So that was the key, was that we missed them so badly that Drew Belgrave, who's, an NLL player now, a great athlete, is chasing the ball down, and then he gets fouled, and then he shanks the free throws, and then we get the O board again. And so it's not like Abby was getting an opportunity to get the ball back. But it was just, we just kept bricking free throws as opposed to the night before making them. So high school kids, man, you never know.
Yeah, I remember they kept kicking way outside of the key, and you guys would jump on them. But I can't remember the time. It was in the last 10 seconds, I think his name was Jamie Conrad, playing for Abbotsford, came down and pulled up. It was probably, he pulled up from about 6 feet shy of the arc and drained a 3. Yeah. And it was just sort of seemed and then you guys went back down the other way. They got fouled on the inbound and missed both free throws. And I'm thinking, but the second free throw kicked so far outside, you get the rebound. It was just sort of, the bounces went your way that night. If you're going to miss, you might as well miss badly, and it worked out for you. But you must have been sweating. You looked pretty calm on the sideline, but you must have been sweating inside watching that all go down.
Yeah, let's just say those are the good. You're just happy that you're not mic'd up at that moment, right? You're not an NCAA or NBA coach mic'd up, but that's the fun of it, right? You just hope that you've built a culture and created a program where the kids feel comfortable and are ready for those moments. And you know what? You go home and you lose. but sometimes you pull it out and good things happen. And I think that just carried us to the final, and we were ready for anything at that point.
Well, one of the unbelievable things I remember jumping to the final now when you guys, Charles Hayes Rainmakers, who have a pretty solid history in basketball over the years.
Oh, fairly decent.
Yeah, and they, but and it was a fairly low scoring game overall. And I remember, I think you guys were up at the half about 6 or 7. And I don't even know if you realized this or if it was part of the plan when you guys were coming out. So I'm kind of curious to know. They didn't score. The third quarter they had 2 field goals, and didn't score their first field goal until 5 minutes into the third quarter. Like, you shut them out for the first 5 minutes of the half. And was that a coaching adjustment, or did is that even something you were aware of, or?
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, I think it was unbelievable. They scored a 1-2. You guys they didn't go to the free throw line once. They had a 2-pointer at 5 minutes, and about 3 minutes left, they hit a 3-pointer, and that was their points for the third quarter. And that was really the turning point in the game. You just shut them right out.
Yeah, I do remember like the few times that I've actually watched the game. I think they scored 39, and then I was like kind of making a mental note of when we had 39, right, and thinking, wow, we could have gone 7 or 8 minutes and not scored a point and pulled that game out. I think they were just exhausted. I do remember, though, at the end of the half, Reese Morris was in foul trouble, and it was, we kind of had to lead the whole game. And at the end of the half, at the end of the second quarter there, we had last possession, so we called timeout and we threw Reese in. And we actually drew a play for Terrell and had Reese as a decoy because we thought they would focus on him, and they played a lot of zone. And then they somehow just lost Reese. Shot went up, and he ended up, and I said, don't get in over the back. Like, don't be silly and you take your third foul. Because, when you get 2 fouls as a coach, sometimes you wonder, should we keep them in? And, some people have a philosophy that they sit, but it's the provincial final and it's our best player. And he got an O board. And I think we went from either 5-7 or 7-9 or something like that at the half. And I just thought that was a key for us to keep rolling. And then I just think they just were so tired, and we were able to tap into our bench and have some guys step up. So I didn't realize that we shut them out that long, because for some reason, the provincial final, it's more of a paranoid. You get that lead and you're just basically, like, I think the guys were probably thinking I was nuts because I was on them, and they're looking up and seeing we're up 14 and 15. And to me, it feels like we're up 2, right? And I think that's just the internal paranoia of a coach never really wanting to stop coaching and get settled until the final buzzer goes.
It's funny you should say that, just on a side. Like, I've always felt this. It's funny, if you're up 14, it feels like you're up 2, and if you're down 14, it feels like you're down 40. Like, no matter which way you look at it, I think it's kind of in the competitive spirit to look at it almost as impossible. One of the things I tried to teach myself to do young was, I've always told myself, like, this is why we watch sports, this is why we play sports, because special things happen. And you always have to kind of keep that in your mind. Like, if you're down 14, you can come back. I mean, look what happened with Tweedsmuir in their final 2 years ago, and they're down. They had a 25-0 run to come back in that. Like, that game was over at the half, and they came back. So you always have to keep in mind. I think it's even with the lead, it's important to remember that things happen in sports, and nothing's ever a lock.
For sure. Or even the next year, the Fleetwood Tupper final, right? Fleetwood was down. What were they down? Like, was it 12-0 or
19-3 at the end of the first quarter?
Right. And so you got 3 quarters of basketball left, and how do you convince a bunch of 16 to 17-year-olds who are exhausted that, hey, chip away, right? One possession at a time.
It's funny if you go back, and I don't want to digress too far, but if you watch some of the highlights on that game, some of the things that started happening was everything started going Fleetwood's way. There's a play right at the beginning of the second half where there was an inbound. A Tupper player grabs the back of the Fleetwood player's jersey, tugs on him. Like, it should have been. I don't know how the ref didn't call it down right there. He ripped out of it, goes into the key, and makes this crazy spin off the glass just everything started going in for Fleetwood. That's a great example to bring up, because my goodness, the shift happened in that game, and you could just see Tupper becoming more and more drained as the game went on, and Fleetwood feeding off it, and as everything fell, like, it just the first quarter to the fourth quarter was just 2 completely different games in that one.
Absolutely. And it's funny, as coaches, sometimes we remember the tough losses more. We don't take time to think about the bigger wins. And we had a crazy game with Fleetwood in the quarter that year. We were up 2, and they had an end out, advanced the ball. We basically said, protect the hoop, and we got caught on a back screen and didn't switch, and their big man laid it in to tie it. So we advanced the ball and then got fouled, and Cam Morris, who was in grade 10, ended up missing the free throws, and then we ended up losing in overtime. But we were down the whole game and came back. So, they could have easily been knocked off by us. And the previous year when we won, they lost in the first round, and I think we're the 1 seed, right? So there's just so many crazy things that can happen, and I think that's why it's such a fun event in time, because you really do have to pay attention to every game.
Well, and I think that just goes across all sports. Like you can go back here, and I don't need specific examples, but you don't remember games that you went to even as a fan and watched where a team won 31-7 or 102-80. You remember the games that come down to the buzzer, win or lose, right? Like that's the draw of it. Like sports wouldn't be fun, I don't think, if you knew you were going to win every night. You know, like it's the whole thrill of competition is the chance that you may go home dejected, and that's what on the flip side, it's the elation you're looking for. But
for sure.
Anyway, I wanted to also give you a chance to talk. I got a real interesting quote that I heard about you and your podcast, and it was, I can't remember it, so don't hold me to it, but it was something about it was an opportunity for people to show their vulnerability and other people to learn from. And I think that's an awesome quote because it's true. Like, and even outside of just sporting world, like you see a lot of people that they'll talk about athletes or whoever comes through and what they had to struggle through sports to succeed. But there's a lot of other things that people struggle through and have to overcome to succeed. And I think it's super important for anybody, kids and even adults, to kind of see the other side of things and what people are going through. And so to give people a platform to be really honest about things, I think is awesome. Like, what do you, why don't you just, give me some of your thoughts behind why you started doing a podcast and what your kind of goal is behind it?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's been super fun. It's something that I've thrown around for a long time, kind of juggled with, but then not being like a super techie guy and knowing exactly what it would look like or how much money it costs to get going. Our junior coach, Corbin Castris, who was a player for our program in 2011 and 2012 and is our junior boys coach right now. Once COVID hit and we all kind of were locked down at home, he was all over me. He just said, let's do it. This is the time. He said, I'll do the producing. You use your specialty, chatting with people and being open, and then I'll do the thing behind the scenes and get it going. And I said, oh, as long as you're okay with it. He said, yeah. And so we got it up and running, and it's been great. It's taught me a lot. It's taught me to be a better listener. I'm an extroverted guy, and I like to be loud and have fun and crack jokes. And but I think, like you said, behind basketball is many stories for many people. And I think as people, we're really bad at talking about ourselves because instantly people will label you and say, oh, well, you're just bragging about yourself, right? When really all you're trying to do is maybe tell your story that can connect with someone else, or maybe connect you to someone else, and they can share that story with each other. So, I didn't really think of it as that in terms of a platform, more just, hey, what did basketball mean to you? How did you use it as a tool? Whether you even just played high school, or you played a couple of years of college, or you ended up playing pro or on the national team, whatever it was, that the idea isn't to get these superstars. The idea is to just allow people to tell their story. And I think the feedback we've got is we're hearing people say, oh, I didn't know that about like Dom Zimmerman, who's a friend of mine and a colleague, who's our first guest, and that he ended up playing pro because Dom's a very humble man, and he would never really, this is a conversation no one would ever have unless they brought it up. Right. And then to hear the different struggles that people had, like we had Steve Maga from out east who ended up playing at SFU for a year, and Jay Triano recruited him and stuff. And he actually admitted on the podcast, he said, I think at that time in my life, I was having some, mental struggles. But at that time in 1995, it was like, we didn't talk about those things, right? There was no platform for that. It was like, put your head down and get through it. And, and he was homesick and he was sad and, maybe even a little bit depressed. So just an opportunity for people to tell their story that people can hear, and tell some funny stories too, like locker room things on the road. That's the fun part. You talk about the winning and the losing and the titles, but everybody that's played a sport, like, we all remember the practices. We all remember the locker room stuff, the road trips. Like, those are the real fun things, right? And I think the cool part is I listen to a lot of podcasts, but they're bigger celebrities than us, right? They're NBA players. They're people that maybe we don't relate to as much. But then now these people are, people from our province and across Canada, where, hey, maybe you do actually have a connection to that person. So it's almost a little bit more tangible in that sense. So it's been a really fun project, and got lots of great feedback. And I guess people like to listen to us ramble and be silly, but also allow people an opportunity to tell their story. And we just hope it continues to grow. We've got some pretty cool episodes dropping. We've got Scott Morrison, who's an assistant with the Boston Celtics right now. Grew up in small town Prince Edward Island, coached at Lakehead University, almost got fired from there, and just worked his way up through the G League, and now he's an assistant coach with the Celtics. Like, what a story to tell that maybe people don't know when you just see him, on the website. So, long answer, but yeah, I think it's cool. I think good things happen when we're vulnerable and you're honest and you're true and you're real, because especially young people, they're way smarter than us in a lot of ways. And if you aren't real with them, they'll see through you real quick. So as coaches, if we try to lay rules down and be hard on them, and we don't ever kind of get to their level and get to know them and be vulnerable as people and let them know our story a little bit, then we can't have a real relationship. So lots of powerful things happening, and it's been a fun adventure, and it's been great. Yeah, so thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. One of the things I remember my dad told me when I was real young, one of the things he told me was he'd never expect anybody to do anything you're not willing to do yourself. And that probably translates over into even into this, even with talking and being honest with people. You can't expect people to come back and have an honest conversation with you if you're not willing to do it yourself. And that's back to a point that you were kind of making about, even on the high side of bragging about things. It goes, to quote the term, that's why things like this are such a great platform, because it allows you to open up for somebody to talk about themselves. Because unfortunately right now, and it goes both ways, like people don't really want to hear the real truth about the downside, and you're not really allowed to talk openly about your upside either. Everybody's going to kind of walk this narrow path of neutralism, for lack of a better term. And so it's super cool that people are doing things like this where you can kind of prod and get people to be honest on both sides of the fence, not just necessarily the good, but sometimes the downside is equally as important to learn from.
Absolutely. And just to think, like an Andrew Mavis, who ends up playing on that 2000 national team, is one of the best players BC's ever produced. And if you just look at his resume, you would just think, oh, it was all rainbows and unicorns for him, right? But the adversity that he had to go through, he had to go to a JUCO, he had to go to Utah, growing up in Vancouver your whole life, to going to a Mormon town in Utah for 2 years and transfer, and just the different things that we've all been through. And I think it just makes everyone feel a little more, not necessarily comfortable, but understand that we all have our own pile, right? We're all battling something, and it's okay to talk about it. And you're right, we do have this fine line of things these days, and it's hard because you feel like you can't say something without offending someone, and we're all working through it on different levels. But this platform allows people to just tell their story and not be judged for it, whether good or bad.
Well, I just got the word in my ear that we hit the half an hour point, so I've already kept you up most of your morning, but I really appreciate you doing this. This has been awesome. As usual, I probably could have gone on for another hour, so we'll have to do it offline one day together, but I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I think this has been awesome, and hopefully we get a chance to do this again at some point.
Yeah, maybe we'll just get Winslade to pay for 18 holes, and we can chop it up on the golf course and lose a dozen balls and do it that way. That would be a good way. I
would definitely be on board for that. So anyway, that's episode 4, Phone Calls with Friends. Thanks again, and we'll talk real soon.
You bet. I just, what would be remiss without saying, I think you guys do an amazing job. You guys work super hard. I don't think people realize the amount of time and effort and energy you put in to make, I would die to have the experiences and, the videos and all the cool things that our kids get. And I've just been so impressed with everyone at the LEC, everyone, involved in your guys' venture and all the things that you do. So thank you for everything that you guys do. You create a great experience. And I know when people from other provinces see what you guys do for us, it's mind blowing. And the LEC is a special thing, and you take it from good to great. So thanks for having me.
I really appreciate that. It's a big compliment coming from the people that actually experience. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Be well, everybody. Be safe. Thanks again, man. Take care.
Okay. Good morning.
All right. Cheers.